welcome to IDD Talks here at ADA University. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and now I'm honored to be joined by Mr. James Sharp, former British ambassador. Ambassador, welcome to IDD Talks.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining our program today. Well, I am planning to discuss with you the recent interview of the President Ilham Aliyev to the local TV channels, the key outcomes, the questions which were addressed regarding to the domestic policy achievements, 5th anniversary of a great victory of Azerbaijan in Karabakh, and also the foreign policy priorities for 2026. Let me start with this important message. President Aliyev noted that today's international system is increasingly shaped by power realities rather than strict adherence to the United Nations Charter. From a Western diplomatic perspective, to what extent does this reflect the realities of the current global political system?
It's a very good question. I would say that it's never been as black and white as he might have implied. In that all the way through the Cold War, of course, the US and the Soviets were doing things which invited accusations of, oh, that's a breach of international law. But clearly, it kind of feels to me and most other commentators that things have, the whole international rules-based order has deteriorated, has been eroded over the last 15 years or so. When did it start? It's slightly unclear. It could have been Iraq 2003. It could have been the global financial crisis in 2008 and a more assertive China. It could have been the Russian invasions of Georgia and Ukraine, for example. So all of these things are sort of quite big events, which I think of, what we're now seeing is that kind of erosion, if you like, of the international order, as coupled with the rise of big leaders, if you like, more nationalistic big leaders. And becomes more of a battle of personalities than it does of competing ideologies or competing arguments. So, I think that everyone, of course, is now focused on Donald Trump and this is his second term and what's going on right now, which, of course, is pretty shocking to everyone in the West, in the world, really. But certainly the implications it has for European security in particular, I think are very, very, very much at the forefront of the European minds at the moment. But look, I mean, it's not necessarily all bad, if you like, in that the ability to then forge deals. You've seen that yourself in terms of the way that the whole Zangezur corridor deal was agreed in August. We've seen Israel-Gaza as well, for example. At least it's not yet sorted, but nevertheless the fighting, or sort of the intense fighting, has stopped. And largely this is thanks to the intervention of the Trump administration. So. That sort of politics can be a force for good, but of course is very, very unsettling, I think, to all politicians worldwide.
Yes, Ambassador. Well, the interview also conveys a message that Azerbaijan expects respect rather than pressure from Western partners, including, let's say, the countries in the European Union. So has the West fully adjusted Azerbaijan's new strategic confidence and the new reality in the region of the South Caucasus?
I mean, I've argued for several years now that the West, in particular Western Europe, hasn't really woken up to the changes in the world and the fact that you've got a much more of a multipolar system, if you like. And that smaller countries, medium-sized countries, have a lot more options. They have agency, if you like, and they can sort of choose which which direction they face. They don't have to be tied into one particular direction, tied in towards the Western model and the Western way of doing things. I think for a lot of us that were working in the foreign policy, the global South reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a big shock. For us, it was a massive, massive breach of international law, and yet. The lack of support that we found in the global South was very eye-opening, for all sorts of reasons. But some of them related to the charges of hypocrisy, for example. But it was a big shock, and I think that was a wake-up moment for Western policymakers. I think for as regards to the situation in the South Caucasus and Azerbaijan, after 2020 and 2023, the US and the EU were trying to play a role as mediator, but. The problem is that they thought that they could be mediated while at the same time also favouring one particular party. And that just is impossible. If you want to be a mediator, you have to be neutral. And I think that was really, Azerbaijan's reaction to that really did make the EU and the US realise, actually, we can't just sort of continue sort of wagging our finger and saying, you must do this, you must do that. We have to actually respect both countries' wishes and actually try to find a solution, which, as I say, the Trump administration has actually managed to help do. But one of the interesting things about that was the fact the two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, did then do an awful lot of negotiating themselves, and they recognised that they had to, sit down and actually sort these things out themselves, because at least one of the parties, couldn't trust outside mediators, for example. So again, positive, but. So yes, things have changed. Yes, I think there's increasing realization, recognition in the West that actually, we need to treat all of the countries, not just Azerbaijan, but all countries with more respect. By and large, I say that, excluding Venezuela, of course, but by and large, as a general rule, I think there's more of a sense of actually we just need to think more broadly about our interests and their interests. I think that, I'll just make one observation, which I still see parliamentarians in particular, maybe in the European Parliament, for example, who haven't really woken up to this. And I think that's maybe an element of parliamentarians often don't have the same power, if you like, and they don't have the same authority. They don't actually have to take responsibility for decisions. So they can still talk about imposing sanctions on various countries, whereas in fact governments actually don't talk about that anymore, because they recognise that actually is not a sensible way to pursue your interests. You have to actually work with countries rather than work against them, quite frankly. And I think that as regards the South Caucasus generally, I think that how the European Union deals with Georgia, I think is a big question mark over that, because their immediate reaction there was to impose sanctions on Georgian Dream members of the government. And I don't know how they're going to resolve that, because it feels like all they've managed to do is push Georgia away from the European Union rather than persuade Georgia to sort of come closer to the EU. So again, I think they still need to work through some of those attitudes as regards Georgia.
Absolutely. So transport, logistics, economic prosperities, and new geopolitical reality appeared in the South Caucasus since the time Azerbaijan restored its territorial integrity and sovereignty. President Aliyev said all prerequisites for the Zangezur corridor have been resolved. What are the remaining political and security risks that could still delay its opening?
Well, there's quite a lot, I'm afraid. I think first and foremost, you've got to get the peace treaty signed and the referendum passed in Armenia. So the real focus, I think, over the next 6 months has to be making sure that the current government and the current prime minister do actually survive the elections and that do they manage to get the referendum through. So that will involve a lot of, I think, support, quite frankly, from countries like Azerbaijan and from Turkey, and also from the West, if you like, to show the benefits of peace, to show the Armenians how a normal situation can look like. And some of the measures that have taken place so far, I think, have been very positive in terms of the shipping of grain or oil, for example. And I think that Turkish Airlines are starting up flights in a couple of months' time as well. To Yerevan. So all of these sorts of things, I just think will help show the Armenian people that actually it's fine to work with your neighbours and cooperate and have peace with those. So I think that's in terms of short term, that's a very big issue. Iran and Russia, of course, are still unpersuaded for obvious reasons, and they still present risks. I think Iran, number of risks. It could be interference. It could be, quite frankly, given what we're seeing going on in Iran at the moment, would the regime implode? I doubt it. However, they could lash out or then sort of look for enemies overseas somewhere and try to sort of cause trouble. The Russians always cause trouble, I'm afraid, and where their interests are threatened, and we know that they do still have a lot of economic and military interest in Armenia. So yes, there are a lot of big risks, I'm afraid. And I think my message to Azerbaijan, I suppose, if there is one, is don't overplay your hand. Really, we talked about Azerbaijan's self-confidence and what have you. And I think that's a positive attribute, but just be slightly careful, because there are a lot of risks. And I think just the thing for Azerbaijan now is to make sure it mitigates those risks as much as possible.
Ambassador, let me use this opportunity to address my next question about the relations between the United Kingdom and Azerbaijan. After the expansion of the defense and security cooperation between London and Baku in 2025, what, let's say, specific areas of cooperation should we expect to see deepened in 2026? So it's about trading, it's about military education, strategic dialogue, or maybe joint planning.
Yes, I long argued for sort of better defence relations, I have to say, and I was very pleased that finally the British Embassy managed to get a defence attaché there, because it kind of felt to me, all the way through 2020 onwards, it's just like crazy that you don't have a defence attaché in a country which is in open conflict with its neighbour. So I'm really pleased that that's actually happened, and that will then open the door to various other cooperation. I suspect it'll be kind of gradual, quite honestly. There may be sort of smaller opportunities in terms of working with the Coast Guard, defence sales to the Coast Guard, extra training places for training courses, things like that. So I wouldn't expect a huge change, really, but I think it does open the door. And when you talk about defence and security, I think it's also just worth bearing in mind the cooperation we have on tackling drugs flows, because that was a very big part of what we were doing when I was in Baku. Was actually working with the State Customs Service, actually just trying to stop the flow of drugs coming in from the south, in particular, and then onwards to Europe. So, hopefully that will continue as well, because that's about the security of the populations as well. So it's not just pure defence, if you like. I think one of the things that I would have also really pushed for and promoted, and you mentioned that in terms of training, was would be things like peacekeeping. And I saw that your president basically said that Azerbaijan won't send any troops overseas for peacekeeping duties, which I think was a shame, actually, because Azerbaijani troops did a great job in Afghanistan, for example. And I do think that it's an area where Azerbaijan could really show how it can participate more in the international system, if you like, to the extent that it still exists. But nevertheless, there's always a demand for peacekeeping forces, and I think that, as I say, Azerbaijan now it has that chance to really spread its wings on the international stage, having hosted COP29, for example. It's now an international player, and I think peacekeeping opportunities would have been a good chance to actually play a greater role in the international system. So I think that's hopefully that's something that can be revisited.
Well, Ambassador, talking about the peacekeeping operations and the missions where Azerbaijan can also participate. Yes, indeed, Azerbaijan has a great potential and great experience of this in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, for example. But during the interview, there was another question about possibilities of Azerbaijan to participate in a peacekeeping operation in Israel, in Gaza, let's say. So the head of the state gave a clear answer. He said that it's not still clear whether it's going to be a peacekeeping operation or an operation to enforce peace, because it's fundamentally different. And there's still no clear answer how it will look, let's say, not clear message raised by the United Nations. Therefore, from these perspectives, what will be your comment?
Yeah, absolutely. The focus was on Gaza, but I think, the way I read it, his statements went wider than Gaza. But as I say, I just hope Azerbaijan can keep the door open, because I think that playing a role in peacekeeping operations worldwide is a really important component to global security.
Yes, absolutely. So, Ambassador, thank you. Thank you so much for joining IDD Talks today. Thank you.
Okay, always a pleasure. Thanks very much.